process is going to wind up exactly, but she will have either 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks of being undermined by her party going into a contest with a new Republican presidential candidate, with a lot of people saying, look, there was a test of whether you could replace Joe Biden and your party didn't think you could. That is really problematic for her.
Tom?
You know, so much of this is about new leadership for the party. Mm-hmm. And, you know, what I hear from a lot of, especially a lot of Hoosier Democrats, is they really want new faces. And you don't have that bench. I mean, by not having this a serious primary, I mean, Marianne Williamson, yes, and Dean Phillips, yes. But you didn't have what you had in 2020, which, granted, was stunted. You didn't have people being tested. And people want to see more of Kamala out there. They want to see if, okay, do you pair Tim Ryan with her? Do you put Roy Cooper with her? Does that create a new generation? Do you put Pete Buttigieg atop the DNC? This is something I've heard floated, granted not recently. I mean, that kind of died down over the last 2 days. But a common sentiment I keep hearing is they want fresh blood. They want something new. And maybe the window is passed for that right now.
It's an intriguing moment for both parties. We're going to keep an eye on the vice presidential pick for the Republicans and, of course, what the Democrats are up to. We just have about a few more seconds here. Actually, you know what? Just stay with us. Let's take you live right now to President Joe Biden. Thanks to our panel for being here. We really appreciate it. President Biden is speaking at NATO's 75th anniversary summit.
Countries, including President Truman, came together in this very room. History was watching. It had been 4 years since the surrender of the Axis powers and the end of the most devastating war the world had ever known. Here, these 12 leaders gathered to make a sacred pledge to defend each other against aggression, provide their collective security, and to answer threats as one, because they knew to prevent future wars, to protect democracies, to lay the groundwork for lasting peace and prosperity, they needed a new approach. They needed to combine their strengths. They needed an alliance. And here they signed the Washington Treaty and created the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the single greatest, most effective defense alliance in the history of the world. Mr. Secretary General, leaders of NATO countries, foreign and defense ministers, representatives from partner nations and the European Union, and members of Congress, distinguished guests, welcome to the 2024 NATO Summit. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to host you in this milestone year, to look back with pride at all we've achieved and look ahead to our shared future with strength and with resolve. Together, we rebuilt Europe from the ruins of war, held high the torch of liberty during long decades of the Cold War. When former adversaries became fellow democracies, we welcomed them into the alliance. When war broke out in the Balkans, we intervened to restore peace and stop ethnic cleansing. And when the United States was attacked on September 11th, our NATO allies, all of you, stood with us, invoking Article 5 for the first time in NATO history, treating an attack on us as an attack on all of us. A breathtaking display of friendship that the American people will never, ever forget. Through all this history, when great changes occurred, people would ask, can NATO adapt? And every time we proved we could adapt, and we did, evolving our strategies to stay ahead of threats, reaching out to new partners to increase our effectiveness. And here with us today are countries from the Indo-Pacific region. They're here because they have a stake in our success, and we have a stake in theirs. Today, NATO is more powerful than ever, 32 nations strong. For years, Finland and Sweden were among our closest partners. Now they have chosen to officially join NATO, and because of the power and meaning of Article 5 guarantee, that's the reason. It was the most important aspect of the alliance in 1949, and it is still the most important aspect. I'd also note, Finland and Sweden joined the alliance not just because their leaders sought it, because their citizens called for it in overwhelming numbers. Remember, NATO's character is fundamentally democratic, always has been and always must continue to be. And today, NATO is better resourced than it ever has been. I want to pause on this because it's significant. In the year 2020, the year I was elected president, only 9 NATO allies were spending 2% of their defense GDP on defense. This year, 23 will spend at least 2%. And some will spend more than that. And the remaining countries that have not yet reached that milestone will get there soon. This remarkable progress, proof that our commitment is broad and deep, that we're ready, that we're willing, we're able to deter aggression and defend every inch of NATO territory across every domain: land, air, sea, cyber, and space. My friends, it's good that we're stronger than ever, because this moment in history calls for our collective strength. Autocrats want to overturn global order, which is by and large kept for nearly 80 years and counting. Terrorist groups continue to plot evil schemes to cause mayhem and chaos and suffering. In Europe, Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine continues, and Putin wants nothing less than Ukraine's total subjugation, to end Ukraine's democracy, to destroy Ukraine's culture, and to wipe Ukraine off the map. And we know Putin won't stop at Ukraine. But make no mistake, Ukraine can and will stop Putin. Especially with our full collective support. They have our full support. Even before Russian bombs were falling in Ukraine, the alliance acted. I ordered the U.S. reinforcements at NATO's eastern flank. More troops, more aircraft, more capabilities. And now the United States has more than 100,000 troops on the continent of Europe. NATO moves swiftly as well, not only reinforcing the 4 existing battle groups in the east, but also adding 4 more in Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia, essentially doubling NATO's strength on the eastern flank. Together, we've built a global coalition to stand with Ukraine. Together, we provided significant economic and humanitarian assistance. And together, we've supplied Ukraine with weapons it needs to defend itself: tanks, armored fighting vehicles, air defense systems, long-range missiles, and millions of munitions. The United States and nearly 24 allied partners have signed bilateral security agreements with Ukraine, and more countries will follow. Today, I'm announcing an historic donation of air defense equipment for Ukraine. The United States, Germany, the Netherlands, Romania, and Italy will provide Ukraine with the equipment for 5 additional strategic air defense systems. And in the coming months, the United States and our partners intend to provide Ukraine with dozens of additional tactical air defense systems. The United States will make sure that when we export critical air defense interceptors, Ukraine goes to the front of the line. They will get this assistance before anyone else gets it. All told, Ukraine will receive hundreds of additional interceptors over the next year, helping protect Ukrainian cities against Russian missiles, Ukrainian troops facing air attacks on their front lines. Make no mistake, Russia is failing in this war. More than 2 years into Putin's war of choice, his losses are staggering. More than 350,000 Russian troops dead or wounded. Nearly 1 million Russians, many of them young people, have left Russia because they no longer see a future in Russia. And Kyiv, remember, fellas and ladies, was supposed to fall in 5 days, remember? Was still standing 2.5 years later and will continue to stand. All of we allies knew that before this war, Putin thought NATO would break. Today, NATO is stronger than it's ever been in its history. When this senseless war began, Ukraine was a free country. Today, it is still a free country. And the war will end with Ukraine remaining a free and independent country. Russia will not prevail. Ukraine will prevail. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a pivotal moment for Europe, for the transatlantic community, and I might add for the world. Let's remember, the fact that NATO remains the bulwark of global security did not happen by accident. It wasn't inevitable. Again and again at critical moments, we chose unity over disunion, progress over retreat, freedom over tyranny, hope over fear. Again and again, we stood behind our shared vision of a peaceful and prosperous transatlantic community. Here at this summit, we gather to proclaim NATO is ready and able to secure that vision today and well into the future. Let me say this. An overwhelming bipartisan majority of Americans understand that NATO makes us all safer. The fact that both Democratic and Republican parties are represented here today is a testament to that fact. The American people know that all the progress we've made in the past 75 years has happened behind the shield of NATO. And the American people understand what would happen if there was no NATO. Another war in Europe, American troops fighting and dying, dictators spreading chaos, economic collapse, catastrophes. Americans, they know we're stronger with our friends. And we understand this is a sacred obligation. As President Reagan put it, and I quote, "If our fellow democracies are not secure, we cannot be secure. If you are threatened, we are threatened. If you're not at peace, we cannot be at peace." Reagan knew it then, and we know it now. Our nations will continue to keep faith with what we pledged in years to come. Now, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to end my remarks a slightly unusual way. NATO is an alliance of nations, but also made up of leaders. And one person in particular has done an extraordinary job leading NATO for the last decade. Secretary General Stoltenberg, would he come forward? So much of the progress we made in the alliance is thanks to the Secretary. He's a man of integrity and intellectual rigor, a calm temperament in a moment of crisis, a consummate diplomat who works with leaders across the political spectrum and always finds a way to keep us moving forward. Secretary, you've guided this alliance through one of the most consequential periods in its history. I realize, I was talking to your wife, I personally asked you to extend your service. Forgive me. And you put your own plans on hold. When the Russian war in Ukraine began, you didn't hesitate. Today, NATO is stronger, smarter, and more energized than when you began. And 1 billion people across Europe and North America, indeed the whole world, will reap the rewards of your labor for years to come in the form of security, opportunity, and greater freedom. For these reasons, I'm pleased to award you the highest civilian honor the United States can bestow, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Ask a military to come forward. And ask him to read the citation.
The President of the United States of America awards this Presidential Medal of Freedom to Jens Stoltenberg. A visionary statesman and ceaseless defender of democracy, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has guided the NATO alliance through the most consequential decade for European security since World War II. When Vladimir Putin launched his brutal assault on the people of Ukraine, betting that NATO would break, Secretary General Stoltenberg proved him wrong. Under his stewardship, NATO has become stronger and more united than ever, and Americans for generations to come will benefit from the safer world he helped create. He demonstrates that the core truth of the alliance is as powerful now as it was 75 years ago. Together, we are stronger.
This is my wish for the world, that peace would find its way to every boy and girl. This is the time for harmony.
You have been watching President Biden speak to the NATO alliance, which is in Washington. Meeting, and we are now joined by Matthew Kroning. He's the Vice President and Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. Matthew, thank you for joining us. Let's just start with what the goal of this NATO summit was, because they don't have these regularly. This is now, as I understand it, the fifth one since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So what's the goal of this one?
Well, this is an important summit. It's the 75th anniversary of NATO. And so part of the purpose is to look back and celebrate past accomplishments, maintaining peace and stability in Europe for 3/4 of a century. But also, they're here to deal with current challenges. You've got the ongoing war with Russia and Ukraine. And so Ukraine is going to be a major focus. Second, NATO last year adopted the first serious defense plans, really since the end of the Cold War. And so making sure they have what they need to implement those plans is a priority. Third, burden sharing. 23 allies are spending their 2% defense target, but others aren't. And so what can we do to make sure all allies are doing their fair share? And then finally, China in the Indo-Pacific. In the last NATO strategic concept, they recognized China as a challenge for the first time. And the so-called IP4 countries, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, are attending this summit. So those are the four really priorities for this meeting.
How much do you think the some of the leaders at this summit are facing some domestic issues? There's not only, of course, President Biden trying to shore up his presidency, but you have Emmanuel Macron who has just weathered his own mild earthquake, not as bad as they thought, in France. How much does that affect the domestic situations that some of these leaders are facing, affect some of those shared goals that you just walked us through?
Yes, you're right, and I'd add to that list a new election and a new government in the United Kingdom.
Of course.
And so I think that these are bumps that the alliance goes through, but this is an alliance of democracies. It has been a strong alliance for 75 years. It's faced a lot of challenges over the years, going back to disagreements over the Suez Crisis, over the Vietnam War, the Iraq War. And yet the alliance has remained strong and has actually grown stronger over time. So I think they'll get through these domestic turbulence just like they've gotten through a lot of other challenges in the past.
And a final question, which is also politically related, is obviously there's a presidential campaign in the United States. The Republican candidate, former President Trump, is not a fan of NATO, questions the benefit of alliances at various times, is improvisational, to say the least. Other world leaders look for stability in these kinds of alliances. How much does the possible reintroduction of Donald Trump into the storyline challenge NATO and cause its other members to have to kind of modify their thinking?
Yes, well, at the Atlantic Council, we meet with European allies almost every day. And I'd say that I think they're cautiously optimistic that they worked with the first Trump administration. I think that they believe that there is bipartisan support for NATO within the United States and that the United States ultimately benefits from NATO. And if you look at the public opinion polling, there is support for that. The Ronald Reagan Institute recently did polling showing broad bipartisan support for NATO, including self-described MAGA Republicans. A majority support NATO. So I think they're cautiously optimistic. And if you look at some of Trump's recent statements, what he's saying is he's boasting that he strengthened NATO, that his threats got NATO to increase defense spending. So again, I think we always have to deal with these domestic challenges with an alliance of democracies. But I think the European allies are cautiously optimistic.
Matthew Kroenig with the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Thank you, John.
Back on Capitol Hill in Washington, senators met for their first Tuesday luncheon since coming back from July 4th recess and since the president's debate against Donald Trump. It was a similar scene in the House where the Democratic caucus gathered for what one congressman described as a, quote, listening session to get on the same page about Biden's candidacy. The results
As
were
I said
mixed.
before, I'm with Joe.
Well, the concerns are whether or not that was a one-off situation, or there is more to the issue.
I think he is energetically and effectively addressing those concerns.
Right now, President Biden is the nominee.